Well, I thought I would do something different tonight, and I checked back in I try to keep up with what I've done, preaching and teaching-wise every year, so I don't do it over and over all that often. So I looked back last year, and we didn't do this, but I did it the year before, and it was the Voices of Easter. And so I thought it takes 2 weeks to do all 12 of them, and I can't do that, but I'm going to do 5 or 6 of them as time permits tonight in the time that we have left. And then I want to finish with a reading of a thing by Pastor S.M. Lockridge, and I want to share that with you, and that'll serve as our benediction tonight. But we begin. I love you, Brother Steve. You're the best pastor I've ever had. Eddie, you must have dropped this.
Oh, goodness.
I better get that. Some of you don't need to see that. Really said, but standing on the promises and because he lives is what it really said. But it's not what he really meant. He meant what I said. All right. We begin with Judas. And there's not a scripture text. Judas's scripture takes place mostly in Matthew 26 and Matthew 27. But if you've heard these, so I'm not going to go through and explain what they are. It's just Judas and the voice of betrayal story. It goes like this. I stand at the edge of a cliff, a rope around my neck. The other end is tied to a limb on that tree. Dark thoughts fill my mind. I wonder what's come over me. I should have been the leader. I was named Judas after the great patriarch Judah, first among the 12 tribes of Israel. I should have been first among the 12, not Peter. But there's no other way. I've done unspeakable things. I've betrayed my master. I'm the voice of betrayal. I deserve to die. That will be the end. At least then no one will be able to use me ever again. I hate it when people use me. The religious leaders, they tried to use me. All they wanted was an opportunity to arrest Jesus without creating a riot. I gave them that opportunity. They used me. They paid me off. And I thought Jesus wanted to use me too. He wanted to use me to build his kingdom. And he wanted to change me. I could see it in his eyes every time the money box came up short. He knew I was stealing. He knew all about me and should have hated me. I could fool everybody except him. I grew to hate him. This tree and this cliff will put an end to all of their plans. He wanted me, but only on his terms. I will not belong to another. I will not be a possession to anyone. Well, I shall be no use to him now. No more errand boy, no more teacher's helper. No one can help him now. They have. It all came to me at the Passover meal. We gathered in an upper room with Jesus to celebrate the feast. I was overwhelmed with sudden clarity and of purpose, an amazing strength of resolve. I could see it all coming together. It would be easy. I knew what I had been made for. It was all too perfect. The conversation around the table was about the week's festival. One or two had something to say about the interfering Romans, but most of the talk was about the faithfulness of God who redeemed Israel from Egypt long ago. I was silent. Jesus caught my eye a few times, but I looked away. Then Jesus interrupted the conversation by announcing that one of us would soon betray him. The room was instantly still. The faces around the table all showed stunned amazement. Of course, everyone had heard talk that the leaders of the council would pay for information leading to Jesus' arrest, but none of them ever imagined that anyone would ever betray the Master. One by one, each disciple asked if he were the one. I asked too, of course. Low voices ringed the table in worried discussion. The meal progressed. As I dipped my hand in the dish, Jesus said something to the two next to him, Peter and John. They looked at me, wariness on their faces, and I knew he had told them. I don't know how he knew, but I had already been to the chief priest and offered to betray Jesus. Somehow he must have known about it. I had to get out of there. I stood and rushed out of the room. It was time. I expected them to go to the garden in Gethsemane after dinner. Whenever we visited Jerusalem, that was his favorite place. He loved the solitude for prayer. I went straight to the chief priest and told him to hurry. If the other disciples guessed my plan, they might spoil everything. We have to act now, I said. They agreed. Some went to get the temple police, the rest of us to the Roman garrison. That was where the priest requested a contingent of soldiers to accompany us on our mission. I led the way. It was exhilarating. I was in command, nobody using me, everybody following me. I had the power. When we got to the garden, as I expected, Jesus was praying. The others had fallen asleep. Jesus heard us coming and roused the disciples. I stepped forward from the shadows. It was dark and the torches didn't provide much light. I'd arranged a signal to identify Jesus in the darkness. I kissed him on the cheek and greeted him, Rabbi. I greeted him that way hundreds of times. We all had. With a simple daily habit, an innocent token of greeting, I betrayed the master. He always wanted to be the master, to be served. For all his talk about serving others, he was always the master, as though he had been born king or something. Well, now that they had it, what kind of kingdom do you think he'll inherit? It's one thing to lead a few disciples and country peasants when the sun shines on the hillside. But see if anyone follows him when the night is come and all is darkness. Nobody can rule from a cross. Well, I will not serve. I'm no one's tool. Now finally, in this act, I'm free. Not being used by anyone. Free. A rope around my neck, standing at the edge of this cliff. Soon I'll be free. And yet I wonder, can a man's death solve anything? I mean, if a man gives himself to death freely, no one taking it from him, can one who gives himself to death accomplish anything? Can a dead man hanging on a tree serve any purpose? I'm going to find out. I'm just one step from freedom. Then there's the voice of Peter. He's the voice of denial. Did you hear it? That rooster. Did it wake you? That rooster. I still hear it. There it is again. No, I'm fine. I guess it just startled me. I've been up all night. I didn't realize the morning was so near, but it's dark. What hour is it? So late. It's cold out here. What are you doing in the street? Yes, I'm from Galilee. Why does everybody make such a big deal out of the obvious? No. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. I'm a fisherman. I've heard roosters crow before, as far back as I can remember. We would fish all night. We would hear the roosters at daybreak when it was time to bring our catch to shore. When I was just a boy and had fallen asleep in the boat, I would hear the roosters crowing and wake to hear the far-off voices of my father and the others discussing the night's catch. He would look across to me in the gray light and our eyes would meet. Rooster music meant an end to the night and the cold. It meant home and warmth and food, but not after tonight. I've been with Jesus. They have him now in Caiaphas' dungeon, I suppose. I'm afraid. Now the Romans around me. The master warned me. He said Satan would sift me like a farmer sifting wheat. But Jesus said he prayed for me that my faith wouldn't completely fail. He told us he was going to die, and I said, no, I'll die for you. What brave words. Now I'm the voice of denial. Earlier tonight, I tried to defend him in the garden. We awoke suddenly. There were torches, soldiers, and a mob with clubs. I had a short sword, and I jumped to my feet, swinging my sword, and I had a fair shot at one of them, but he moved his head at the last instant, and all I got was his ear, and Jesus rebuked me. He told me to put up the sword. The soldier who grabbed me from behind made sure I did, and then it was all noise and confusion. They took him, nearly trampled us. Even a garden doesn't offer us such many soft places to land in the dark. By the time we collected ourselves, they were gone. John and I, we followed a ways back. They brought him into the city. We made our way through the dark streets, staying a safe distance behind the soldiers. All the way across town, we soon guessed that they were bringing him to the palace of the high priest, but what for? The council couldn't meet at night. The priests and scribes and temple guard went through the gate into the courtyard. The Roman centurion posted a guard and led away the rest of the soldiers. We were stopped just outside the arched passage at the outside gate, but the portress knew John. I could tell she had her doubts about me, but she let us in through the outer gate and then into the inner courtyard. We were inside the high priest's house. John made his way into the hall where a large crowd was assembling. I had never been in a house like this before. I stayed in the courtyard with the servants. I hoped no one would question me. I didn't know what I should be doing or how to answer. And there was a chance that someone might recognize me. What if one of the temple guards identified me as the man with the sword? What if the servant whose ear I cut off saw me and accused me? Then my heart froze. There he was, my victim. But he turned his head and I saw a healthy ear right where it should be. I must have mistaken him in the firelight. Perhaps I would be safe if I stayed in the shadows. Everything was fine until the young portress came over from the gate to the fire. Her eye picked me out of the shadows and she said, "You're one of this man's disciples, aren't you?" Everyone in the circle looked at me and I just couldn't say yes. Not me. I'm not a follower of Jesus. I turned away from her, wishing she had disappeared. She stayed a while, speaking in a low voice to one of her friends and pointing at me. The portress left the fire, but soon her friend spoke up. "This fellow is one of them. He was with Jesus the Nazarene," and other voices rose to agree, accusing me of being one of Jesus' followers. Anger and shame rose in me like hot poison. I said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Maybe that satisfied them. They fell back to their gossip, buzzing about the events of the night, and things began to settle down. I hoped I was finished with them. Maybe 2 denials would be enough to save my neck. The night dragged on. What was happening in the hall? I strained to hear. Evidently, the council had convened after all. What were they doing? I moved closer to the hall, shifting for a position where I could see, and I had no idea where John was. I finally found a place where I could see Jesus himself standing before the council, his head bowed, completely still, surrounded by noise and confusion. I asked the man next to me what was happening. And he turned and said to me, he said, "So you're a Galilean too, aren't you?" Several faces turned our way, and I recognized 2 or 3 who had been standing at the fire. "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Angry and excited, I began to call curses down on myself. I swore that I never knew Jesus. The words caught in my throat. From where Jesus stood before the council, he looked out into the courtyard, and in the yellow light, our eyes met. It was just as he said. He told me that I would deny him 3 times. I said it would never happen. Peter, the rock, the master's faithful follower and chief defender. I had become the voice of denial. The crowing of the cock told me what I really was. I'm disgraced. The others will despise me. My name will become a curse. I stumbled to the gate. The portress let me out. All the warmth, company, and light behind me. So late. It's so cold out here. I felt him. I was the chief among the 12, and I felt him. 3 times over I felt him. How could I fail the one whom I love so much? Now I wonder, do I really love him? Can real love produce this kind of failure? But I do love him, don't I? If I loved him, I would keep his word. I would not fail. Do I even love him? The voice of the rooster testifies against me. My own words testify against me. My heart condemns me. I was the leader among the 12. I confessed him on the mountain, but I denied him in the night. Hereafter, I will be known as the voice of denial. The chief priests are the voice of deception. My name is Abishua. I'm one of the chief priests in Jerusalem. We have charge over all the functions of the temple. It's our sacred office to offer sacrifices in the temple for the glory of God and the redemption of his people. It is the highest office in the land, and with the scribes, we are the most powerful religious leaders in Israel. Our authority is unquestioned. Everybody knows our lineage. From the time of Aaron, we have been God's chosen vessels, his official ministers. So it has always been, so it shall always be. We view any circumstance which might upset this order with profound concern. The recent case of the troublemaker from Galilee illustrates my point. You understand his teachings have disturbed the people and have even called our temple practices into question. A dangerous extremist. He has challenged an authority and practice that transcends our time, one established and approved by long-standing tradition. Certainly we've encountered similar challenges before, but those who would destroy, cloaking themselves in the disguise of reform, but none as dangerous as this man, Jesus of Nazareth. His followers and sympathizers have numbered in the thousands. Some even dare to claim that he may be the long-awaited Messiah. But surely if that were so, we in the priesthood should have been among the first to claim and honor him. No. I'm afraid people are too easily deluded. You see, we've been aware of this man for quite some time, and none of our information substantiates these irresponsible claims. We first took notice of him in connection with the affairs of John the Baptist, so-called. Our informants tell us that when Jesus was baptized, some who were there reported a miraculous sign from heaven as he came up from the water. If you believe such things, perhaps you would be interested in some beachfront property I have on the Dead Sea. But rumors spread quickly and are believed too easily among the common folk, and the small crowds became larger. He became decidedly dangerous. You may have heard, for example, that he healed a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath, a clear violation of the observance. But when his error was called to his attention, he actually claimed to be the Lord of the Sabbath. And when he came to Jerusalem, he made a terrible scene right there in the temple. He drove out all those who changed money and overturned their tables. You must excuse me. I don't like to raise my voice, but some things cannot be tolerated. The temple and its precincts, they're our responsibility, and to attempt to reform without going through the proper authority is nothing short of criminal. He knew we were angry, and so he tried to disguise his purposes. He stayed away from Jerusalem and taught the country people using parables to hide his malice. We didn't wait idly. We attempted on several occasions to discredit him before the people he misled. And we have considered a long series of plans to remove him. Our opportunity presented itself at the time just before Passover, when one of his followers came to us and offered to betray him. He was a dreadful fellow named Judas, a common man of Cowart. But one must take one's opportunities where one finds them, and he came for a modest price. For just 30 pieces of silver, he agreed to hand him over to us. This was our time. It was the night of the Passover. We were still reclining at the table when Judas knocked. And he had come directly from the house where Jesus and his followers were gathered. Judas told us that soon they would make their way out of the city by the eastern gate across the Kidron to the Garden of Gethsemane. It was their customary practice, and it fit our purpose exactly. An escort was arranged. Some men with arms were deemed prudent. Judas led us to the garden, and he kissed his master in the familiar greeting. That was our sign. His arrest was effected, and he was taken into custody to the house of the high priest. There he received a pretrial hearing by Annas, and subsequently he stood before Caiaphas to answer our charges. The trial was critical. We had to work quickly and carefully. Our charges against Jesus had to be substantiated by witnesses. Regrettably, we were forced to pay certain witnesses for their testimony. Their testimony was not as compelling as one would wish, but it did open the way for direct examination, and soon he was condemned by his own lips. He blasphemed openly before the council. Having gained Caiaphas' sentence, all we needed was the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. We're not allowed to carry out capital punishment without the approval of the empire's occupation force. We've learned how to play our cases before the Romans. All the governor cares about is the authority of Rome. All we had to do was convince him that this Jesus was a dangerous rebel. Well, it was about daybreak. We arrived at the governor's residence and called for a hearing. Sleepy-eyed and really not interested, Pilate heard our charges. We suffered some anxious moments as Pilate played the stupid Roman, adopting the position that Jesus had done nothing wrong. Clearly this wouldn't do. We were so close to the final solution. We had paid a disciple to betray him. We had paid witnesses for their testimony. We couldn't be stopped just one step short of the goal. As Pilate interviewed the Nazarene, we worked our way through the crowd, arranging for a convincing solidarity. So when Pilate stood him before us, the crowd answered with one voice, our voice, crucify. The chant surged through the crowd like the undulations of an angry serpent. The governor took our message, Jesus must die. Pilate was in no mood for a fight. He released Jesus to the crowd, and he was taken out of the city to the place of the skull and crucified as a common criminal. Our work was finished. Pilate made one final gesture, a sign placed above the head of Jesus as he hung on the cross. The words were written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek for all the world to read. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. We objected. Don't write King of the Jews. Write instead, he said, I am the King of the Jews. But Pilate refused. Stubborn Roman fool. Small matter, though. Jesus died on that cross. Terrible in a way. Of course, without question. But we looked at it as a great triumph. The threat to God's appointed priesthood had failed. Our place in office had been secured. The priesthood continues to offer sacrifice for the glory of God and the redemption of his people. So it shall ever be. Then there's Caiaphas, the voice of condemnation. Some call me a puppet, but I'm not. Those who see me as a puppet obviously know nothing about the strength of family ties. They have no understanding of my loyalty to my father, or actually my father-in-law, as you would call him. He has a strength of influence over me as though he were my father. Annas is a powerful man, perhaps the most powerful Jew in Palestine. He was appointed high priest by the governor, Quirinius, 25 years ago. During his term, the Sanhedrin was little more than his personal judicial body. And even though he was deposed more than 15 years ago, he still dominates the council and the priesthood. Always a manipulator, enforcing his will. He had his successor removed from office so that his son, Eleazar, could serve as high priest. And then he worked things so that I could receive the title. And his purposes don't end with me. There are still 4 other sons and a grandson to follow. My father, he's a powerful man. I do not doubt that each one in turn will serve as high priest. Our father gets his way. And now, although Annas is the power, I have the office. I do pretty much what he wants me to do, and he makes sure I know what he wants done. So you see, the events of that night were not entirely my doing. This mob burst into the courtyard of our home, dragging a bound prisoner. They took him first to my father-in-law, and I'm used to being second. Whenever there's a quarrel for the high priest to decide, the matter is always brought to me for a hearing, but only after Annas has heard it. It was late it was probably after midnight. I'd already gone to bed. Apparently Annas was still up. He interviewed their prisoner while I dressed. I came down to the hall and greeted the chief priest. By the time some of the elders of the city, many members of the Sanhedrin had arrived. The man with the mob was Jesus of Nazareth. They presented their accusation. He was a blasphemer, and his case must be decided immediately. Blasphemy, a capital offense. I have to tell you, I wasn't much interested in this business, but I caught a look from my father. He was interested. So I hastily convened a meeting of the Sanhedrin, since many were at hand. We heard the evidence. Frankly, there wasn't much of a case. The preliminary interview with Annas had turned up nothing we could use. It was clear that we would need more evidence if we hoped to make any charges stick. I didn't like hearing a capital case without the full counsel, so I adjourned the council so we might renew the inquisition later, when more could be there. I commanded the officers to take Jesus down to the dungeon in the lowest level of my house, there to be held behind bars and chains until the evidence was gathered and the full council convened. I didn't know what else to do with it. In the morning, just before dawn, we reconvened. Most of the council members were present, along with the elders of the people, both the chief priest and the scribes. And there were some witnesses who claimed to have heard Jesus make blasphemous statements. But the witnesses couldn't agree. There weren't two stories that matched in the whole lot. If we couldn't get some real evidence, we were going to have to dismiss the case. Finally, one of the Sanhedrin asked him directly, "If you're the Christ, tell us." That was something. Maybe the prisoner would supply his own evidence, but his response was not as direct. He said, "If I tell you, you will not believe me." Then he said something about the Son of Man being seated at the right hand of the power of God, and that just enraged the council. One of them asked him, they said, "So are you the Son of God?" And to this his reply was direct, "I am." The room erupted. Voices shouted, "Blasphemer, traitor, pagan." The Sanhedrin was in a frenzy, but Jesus just stood silent. Of course, it was all wrong. How did we expect to get away with this? This wasn't a trial. In the first place, our law does not permit a trial to be held at night. And yet we had been up all night long. And then we had the man before us only because of a blood money bribe paid to one of his followers. Plus, we had asked the defendant to incriminate himself. That was excluded from our law as well. And there I was, about to pronounce a capital sentence, even though our law does not permit a sentence to be pronounced until the day after a conviction. What were we thinking? It was the kind of thing you hope nobody ever hears of. I could feel my Father's eyes on me. It crossed my mind that I had an opportunity to step out of his shadow, to rise to a higher level of justice, and to throw out the case. But there was Annas. His will beat on me like a hot summer sun. I really had no choice but to follow his wishes and please the chief priest. I knew what I ought to do, but I also knew what I had to do. I'm one of the 12 voices of Easter. I'm the voice of condemnation. It was my voice that proclaimed the innocent Nazarene guilty of blasphemy. What else could I do? Don't you understand the power of our family? Or don't you understand the significance of the office of high priest? I'm not a puppet. I am a dutiful son. In that room that morning, a simple man submitted to the will of his Father. That's all. Pilate, the voice of evasion. This is not the life I hoped for. I'm a Roman citizen. My family is wealthy. Our name is held in honor and respect. For all of my adult life, I've carefully made my way among the powerful elite of Rome. I positioned myself to receive a prestigious appointment from Caesar. My glory would be to do his bidding, to be part of the greatest empire the world would ever know. Kings and kingdoms pass away, but Rome endures. the glory of my name to serve Caesar. But the emperor sent me here, to Judea. What glory or prestige can there be in governing this mad race of people? The Jews are subject to Roman power, but they're not of the Roman mind. In Rome, we cultivate common sense, peace, and ordered prosperity. But these people, they're impossible. They're unreasonable, rebellious, restless, fanatics. There's nothing to love or admire among them, nothing noble, no honor. Rome does not govern here, she babysits. They have incomprehensible religious convictions. They stubbornly hold antique traditions that no one can explain sensibly, and they automatically hate me. Not that it worries me. If I were loved by this mad race, that would worry me. They have no notion of Rome or her empire. They must be taught, but they won't learn. I've done things for the very purpose of angering them. I took their temple treasure to pay for an aqueduct I was building. Another time I brought the Roman standard into Jerusalem to their temple. All the golden shields inscribed with the images and names of our gods. How they screamed about defilement and desecration. They make my service here miserable, and I make their subjection to Rome miserable. It was springtime. I breathed deeply the sea air wafting in from the Mediterranean to my palace in Caesarea. But the spring is always spoiled by the Passover festival. I hoped the Jews would cause me no problems during their week of celebration. Perhaps this spring would be different from the others. That's what I hoped. A journey to Jerusalem so I would be at hand in case of trouble. You see, their feast commemorates some deliverance in their ancient history, and their nation still hatches the occasional desert deliverer who would overcome the empire of Rome. Prudence requires a watchful eye at seasons when national spirit runs high. I was awakened early in the morning, just after sunrise, by the noise of their council, the Sanhedrin, the chief priests and elders, and an angry crowd at my gate. I recognized the mob spirit, dangerous and difficult to turn aside. They would be trying to lynch someone. I would have to play for time and let their passion cool before we could settle any business. The gate was open. They burst into the courtyard. I walked slowly to my place. The moment needed calm. It was easy to spot their victim. He stood out, their target, the object of their concentrated fury. He was bound. I asked their leader what they wanted. He said, this man was misleading the Jewish people, telling them not to pay taxes to Caesar, and he was claiming to be the Messiah. How ironic to hear these Jews who so hated paying taxes to Rome, charging one of their own with speaking against Roman taxes. Surely their real grievance lay elsewhere. Well, he might be trying to raise money for his own treasury if he thought himself to be their Messiah king. I asked him directly, are you really the king of the Jews? I wanted everybody to hear that sarcasm in my voice. It was a ridiculous charge. This Jesus of Nazareth, the king of the Jews. The Sanhedrin and the chief priests, they were blind to their folly. I could tell this man had committed no serious crime, and I told the Jewish leaders so. No, they insisted. He causes unrest everywhere he goes, from Galilee to Jerusalem. Is he a Galilean, I asked. I saw an opportunity to divert him. Galilee is under the direction of Herod Antipas, and just happened to be visiting in Jerusalem. Herod was as close as they would ever come to having a king of the Jews. He was incompetent, but he was an ethnic aristocracy of sort, and Rome uses his type when possible. So I sent this angry band over there to Herod, and I sent along an assistant to observe just so I would know. I was glad to be rid of my problem while creating one for dear Antipas, but before long they returned. It seemed that Herod, drawing from his deep wisdom and exercising his keen political mind, had mocked Jesus and taunted him, asking him to perform miracles. When the prisoner would not perform, Herod wearied of his sport, so he dressed Jesus in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to my judgment hall. I must say the robe looked better on Jesus than it ever did on Herod. King of the Jews, indeed. Again, the chief priests and rulers of the people demanded a judgment. Their hatred for this man had not cooled one bit. Again, I did what I could to put them off. I examined the prisoner again. You know, it's not easy, this business of judgment. The law is not always adequate for the case, and it's no fun dealing with someone like Jesus at the judgment seat. I was too conscious of my own failures. What is it they say? An innocent prisoner convicts a guilty judge? Well, I suppose it won't be the last time. And then to complicate matters, my wife interrupted. She called me aside urgently. She frightened me. In fact, she said she looked like the walking dead. She said she had had a dream about this man and told me not to have anything to do with him. She was terrified. I confess it unnerved me, but one cannot run an empire on dreams and visions. I couldn't put it off any longer. I told them I found no fault in the prisoner. He's no threat to Rome. Oh, it's not just the taxes, they said. Jesus had transgressed some provisions of the religious law. Fine, I said. Try him in your council. Don't bring Jewish religious law into a Roman court. They were furious. They said their law required death. I was running out of diversions. Herod wouldn't take the case. Their council wouldn't take the case. And I'd raised my voice twice in evasion, but some things would just not go away. I didn't think they would really insist on crucifixion. Rome crucifies Jews to make sure everyone understands who rules the world. Jews would not crucify a Jew. Every cross reminded them of a king they didn't want and could never defeat. I just needed to give them a way out. I felt sure that they would back down. So I proposed a compromise. I followed the custom of releasing a prisoner to them each year at this time. I did so to demonstrate Roman kindness and to generate goodwill. I thought perhaps I could release Jesus to them as a prisoner, and the chief priests would have none of it. They cried for Barabbas, a thoroughly nasty sort, to be released instead of Jesus. I couldn't believe my ears. How they must have hated this Nazarene. I could not escape. I would have to release Barabbas, and still I had to deal with Jesus. My next thought was to have Jesus scourged. Perhaps some blood would satisfy them. The soldiers of Rome use a whip of several thongs with pieces of lead or brass or sharp bits of bone in the ends. They laid his back bare in short order, and the flesh hung from his back in strips, deep veins and arteries exposed. I brought Jesus to the mob. Surely his blood would satisfy their thirst, but I was wrong. They screamed for his death. A third time I told them he was innocent. But the crowd began to yell, "Crucify! Crucify! Crucify!" They would be satisfied with nothing less than his execution. There was no room for evasion. I finally realized that the only way to be done with the matter was to release Jesus to the crowd. I called from my basin and washed my hands of his guilt or innocence for all to see. Then I turned him over to the mob, and they crucified him. Nothing I tried would make it go away. The problem of Jesus always came back to me. It's not a thing to be proud of, not the way I hoped my service to Caesar would go, but I do not see what I could have done differently. Just bad luck, I guess. I console myself with the thought that few people will ever know of this matter. It's just a minor affair of a mad race of backwater province people. My name, when remembered, will be remembered with the glory and honor of Caesar, ruler of all the earth, and Rome, the kingdom that will endure. My voice, a voice of evasion, will grow silent, but my name will be remembered in honor, and not because of some unfortunate man who has suffered under Pontius Pilate. Let me read you this, and this is something different. This is a thing by a colored preacher by the name of S.M. Lockridge. I can't remember the church. I want to say it was maybe First Baptist Church in San Diego, California, many years ago. He wrote this called, "That's My King. Do You Know Him?" And this will serve as our benediction. The Bible says my king is a seven-way king. He's the king of the Jews. That's a racial king. He's the king of Israel. That's a national king. He's the king of righteousness. He's the king of the ages. He's the king of heaven. He's the king of glory. He's the king of kings, and he's the Lord of lords. That's my king. I wonder, do you know him? David said, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament show his handiwork. My king is a sovereign king. No means of measure can define his limitless love. No far-seeing telescope can bring into visibility the coastline of his shoreless supply. No barrier can hinder him from pouring out his blessings. He's enduringly strong. He's entirely sincere. He's eternally steadfast. He's immortally graceful. He's imperially powerful. He's impartially merciful. Do you know him? He's the greatest phenomenon that ever crossed the horizon of this world. He's God's Son. He's the sinner's Savior. He's the centerpiece of civilization. He stands in solitude of himself. He's awesome. He's unique. He's unparalleled. He's unprecedented. He's the loftiest idea in literature. He's the highest personality in philosophy. He is the supreme problem in higher criticism. He's the fundamental doctrine of true theology. He's the cardinal necessity of spiritual religion. He's the miracle of the age. He's the superlative of every good thing, of every good that you chose to call him. He's the only one qualified to be an all-sufficient Savior. I wonder if you know him today. He supplies strength for the weak. He's available for the tempted and the tried. He sympathizes and he saves. He strengthens and sustains. He guards and he guides. He heals the sick. He cleanses lepers. He forgives sinners. He discharges debtors. He delivers captives. He defends the feeble. He blesses the young. He serves the unfortunate. He regards the aged. He rewards the diligent. And he beautifies the meek. I wonder if you know him. Well, my king is the king. He's the key to knowledge. He's the wellspring to wisdom. He's the doorway of deliverance. He's the pathway of peace. He's the roadway of righteousness. He's the highway of holiness. He's the gateway of glory. Do you know him? Well, his office is manifold. His promise is sure. His light is matchless. His goodness is limitless. His mercy is everlasting. His love never changes. His word is enough. His grace is sufficient. His reign is righteous. And his yoke is easy and his burden is light. I wish I could describe him to you, but he's indescribable. He's incomprehensible. He's invincible. He's irresistible. You can't get him out of your mind. You can't get him off your hand. You can't get him, you cannot outlive him. You can't live without him. The Pharisees couldn't stand him, but they found they couldn't stop him. Pilate couldn't find any fault in him. The witnesses couldn't get their testimonies to agree. Herod couldn't kill him. Death couldn't handle him, and the grave couldn't hold him. Yep, that's my king. That's my king. Yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. How long is that, you ask? When you get through with all of the forevers, then amen and amen. God bless you.